Imagine a world where vast plains and wild forests dominated the earth. A world without cities, roads, or modern technology. About 10,000 years ago, our ancestors lived in an environment undergoing rapid transformation. The last ice age had just ended, and glaciers were retreating, leaving behind fertile lands, fresh rivers, and dense forests. This abrupt climate change radically altered how humans had to adapt to survive. At this time, humanity was at a crucial turning point. Some groups were still nomadic hunter-gatherers, roaming the landscapes in search of food and water, while others were beginning to experiment with early forms of agriculture. Humans were learning to domesticate certain plants and animals, laying the foundations of what would become civilization. Each discovery, each innovation, represented a battle against nature, but also a step toward a more stable and organized way of life. But why is it so fascinating to explore human life 10,000 years ago? Understanding this period means going back to the roots of our modern society. It means observing the first social structures, the first attempts to store and grow food, and the first tools that allowed our ancestors to adapt to a changing world. By analyzing their choices and lifestyles, we can better understand how humanity evolved and how the challenges of survival shaped our culture and behaviors. So, what were humans really doing 10,000 years ago? How did they live, whether they hunted, gathered, or experimented with agriculture? What tools did they use to protect themselves and build their daily lives? In this video, we'll explore every aspect of their lives, from their habitats and diet to their beliefs, art, and relationships. Prepare to travel back in time, discover a world both close and strangely distant, and understand how our ancestors shaped the path of humanity. The way of life of humans 10,000 years ago. At that time, humans lived mainly in small nomadic groups, depending entirely on natural resources for their survival. Their way of life was centered around the hunting, gathering, and collecting local resources, with strategies adapted to the seasons and animal migrations. Hunting. The animals hunted varied greatly depending on the region. In the plains and forests of Europe and Asia, humans hunted mammoths, bison, deer, wild boars, and reindeer. In Africa and the Middle East, prey included antelopes, gazelles, buffaloes, and sometimes pygmy elephants. On the coasts and near the rivers, fishing provided fish, crustacean, and mollusks. For hunting, humans used sophisticated tools for the time. Archaeological excavations have found wooden spears with stone or bone tips of the javelin throwers, allowing you to throw further and with more force, as well as traps and nets to capture smaller animals or in groups. Men often moved in team, adopting strategies to isolate an animal or make it fall into traps. This organization already showed a fine understanding of animal behavior and collective planning. Survival strategies and social organization for hunting. Hunting was not only a means of subsistence, but also a central element of social cohesion. Each member of the group had a specific role. Some watched for prey, others threw weapons, and still others ensured the safety of the tribe. Knowledge about the seasons, animal migrations, and hunting areas was passed down orally from generation to generation, which contributed to the collective memory and group identity. Picking alongside hunting, humans practiced intensive gathering. They consumed roots, tubers, berries, fruits, nuts, and seeds. Gathering not only allowed supplementing the diet with protein, but also guaranteed intakes of essential vitamins and minerals. Some plants were even used for medicinal purposes or to prepare dyes and tools. To preserve food, humans had developed different techniques. They dried or smoked meat, stored nuts and seeds in skins or baskets, and buried certain tubers to extend their shelf life. Gathering was therefore an activity that required observation, know-how, and anticipation in order to manage resources according to the seasons. Organization of groups. Humans lived in small groups of 20 to 50 individuals, sometimes called tribes or clans. The small size facilitated mobility and made it possible to meet food needs without exhausting the local environment. Each member had a specific role. Men were mainly involved in hunting and protecting the group. Women were primarily responsible for gathering and preparing food and raising children. The children gradually learned this knowledge and participated in light tasks, observing and imitating adults to acquire the skills necessary for survival. This division of labor was not strict, but reflected a distribution, effective responsibilities based on individual strengths and knowledge. Cooperation and solidarity were essential. Survival depended on the group's ability to work together and share resources. In short, the daily life of humans, 10,000 years ago, was a subtle balance between mobility, technical know-how, observation of nature, and social organization. Every action, whether hunting an animal or harvesting fruit, was part of a complex network of knowledge and social relationships, ensuring the survival and transmission of culture through the generations. Development of agriculture, the first steps towards settlement. Around 10,000 years ago, a fundamental shift began to radically transform human life. The transition from hunting and gathering to agriculture. A slow but revolutionary shift did not happen everywhere at once. Some regions of the Fertile Crescent, an area covering parts of the modern-day Middle East, were among the first to see the emergence of this idea. Humans began observing nature, noting which plants grew spontaneously and which produced the most nutritious seeds. Gradually, they experimented with growing cereals, such as wheat and barley, and domesticating legumes and other edible plants. But agriculture wasn't limited to plants. Humans also learned to domesticate certain animals, a process that would take centuries to perfect. Sheep, goats, cattle, and later pigs became regular sources of meat, milk, and hides. This domestication not only provided a more stable food source, but also new materials for clothing, shelter, and tools. The dog, already a faithful companion of hunters, played an important role in guarding livestock and protecting communities. The transition to a sedentary lifestyle brought many benefits, but also considerable challenges. Food security became more predictable thanks to regular harvests. But humans now depended on the climate and the health of their crops. Bad seasons or plant diseases could endanger an entire community. Furthermore, living in one place permanently exposed populations to disease, which spread more easily within villages than among dispersed nomadic groups. Despite these risks, agriculture enabled unprecedented population growth. Villages began to emerge, with more permanent dwellings built of stone, wood, or clay. Surplus food resources provided the opportunity to feed larger populations and free up some community members for other activities, such as crafts, art, or the construction of specialized tools. Gradually, these villages became centers of exchange, culture, and innovation. Community life grew more complex, giving rise to the first organized social structures and hierarchies. Agriculture was thus much more than just a food production technique. It transformed the way humans interacted with each other and with their environment. By domesticating plants and animals, humanity learned to shape nature to suit its needs, while developing a long-term vision of survival. This period marked the beginning of a process that would, thousands of years later, lead to modern civilizations, cities, trade routes, and technological innovations. In short, 10,000 years ago, agriculture was a watershed. It changed not only how humans fed themselves, but also how they lived, worked, organized their communities, and envisioned their futures. Understanding this transition helps us grasp the ingenuity of our ancestors. Their ability to observe the world and gradually transform it, step by step, into a more stable and organized society. Tools and technologies 10,000 years ago. By this time, humans had already developed a great mastery of natural materials to make tools suitable for all aspects of their daily lives. Observing nature and experimenting allowed them to transform stone, bone and wood into effective instruments for hunting, preparing food, making clothing, or building shelters. Materials used. The stone was the most common material for making sharp tools. Humans selected hard rocks such as flint, obsidian, or quartzite, which were capable of producing very sharp edges when properly knapped. The knapping technique, called stone cutting, consisted of striking the stone with another piece of stone or hard wood to detach sharp chips. These chips were then used for cutting, scraping, or drilling. Animal bones and teeth were another essential material. Long bones were transformed into arrowheads, sewing needles, harpoons, or spatulas, while deer teeth and antlers were used to make decorative or functional tools. Bone had the advantage of being both strong and relatively easy to work with stones. The wood, on the other hand, was used to make tool handles, spears, spear throwers, and hunting sticks. Some woods were more resistant to bending and impact, allowing for more accurate and durable weapons. Humans chose wood based on its mechanical properties and local availability. Types of tools. Humans of that time had a wide variety of tools, each meeting specific needs. Stone knives and scrapers, used for cutting meat, preparing animal skins, or working with wood. Axes and hatchets, made of polished or cut stone. They were used to fell small trees. Split wood and build shelters. Bone needles, essential for sewing clothes and shoes made from animal skins, providing protection from the cold. Propellants and arrowheads, instruments allowing effective hunting at a distance, increasing the range and precision of projectiles. Harpoons and spears, used for fishing and hunting larger animals, especially in rivers and on coasts. Each tool reflected a precise adaptation to everyday needs and demonstrated strategic thinking on efficiency and sustainability. Important innovations of the time. Several innovations of this period marked a turning point in human life. The stone polishing to make stronger axes and knives. The invention of bone sewing needle, allowing the production of custom-made, waterproof clothing. The use of thrusters, which increased arm strength to throw javelins further and with greater precision. The development of bone and stone carving and engraving techniques, testifying not only to a utilitarian function, but also to an artistic and symbolic aspect. These innovations show that human intelligence combined pragmatism and creativity, transforming natural materials into sophisticated survival tools. How these tools have improved daily life. The impact of these tools on daily life was considerable. Thanks to the knives and scrapers, humans could prepare meat and hides more quickly, improving their diet and clothing. Axes and propellers made hunting more efficient and safer, allowing larger prey to be captured and broadening the food spectrum. Bone needle revolutionized protection against the cold, making it possible to make close-fitting, weather-resistant clothing. In addition, mastering these tools made it easier the construction of shelters and utility objects, reducing the effort required to protect themselves from the elements and organize the camp. The production and maintenance of tools was also an important social activity, as it involved the sharing of techniques and the transfer of knowledge between generations. In short, the tools and technologies of 10,000 years ago were fundamental to human survival, mobility, and creativity. They allowed them to better exploit their environment, increase their efficiency in daily tasks, and develop skills that would lay the foundations for future civilizations. These instruments are much more than simple objects. They represent the fruit of human ingenuity and the ability to transform nature to meet its essential needs. Art and culture, the first expressions of the human soul. 10,000 years ago, as humans explored new ways to feed themselves and establish lasting settlements, another dimension of their lives began to develop. Art and culture. Cave paintings, found in caves around the world, are among the earliest visible traces of human expression. These images often depicted hunted animals, scenes from everyday life, or abstract motifs whose exact meaning remains a mystery. But what is certain is that these works served a much deeper purpose than mere decoration. They demonstrated the human capacity to conceptualize, imagine, and convey ideas. Sculptures and figurines complemented these creations. Small statuettes made of stone, bone, or clay, they often represented human or animal forms. Some researchers believe these objects served a symbolic or religious purpose, perhaps linked to fertility, community protection, or hunting rituals. Every sculpted or painted detail, every artistic gesture revealed a desire to understand and influence the invisible world surrounding these communities. Art also served to strengthen social and cultural ties. Rituals, often accompanied by music, song, or dance, allowed values, beliefs, and traditions to be transmitted from one generation to the next. These spiritual practices reflect a reflection on existence, death, and humankind's place in nature. They showed that, even at that time, humans were not content with simply surviving. They were seeking to give meaning to their lives and their environment. Communication and language played a central role in this transmission. Although we have no direct evidence of written languages from this period, researchers believe that proto-historic forms of language already existed. Symbols, gestures, and sounds were used to coordinate activities, tell stories, and share knowledge essential for survival, such as hunting techniques, plant cycles, and safe places to shelter. Art and language complemented each other. One expressed what the other could not always convey directly through speech. The emergence of art and culture, 10,000 years ago, reveals that our ancestors already possessed a rich intellectual and spiritual life. They were not simply hunter-gatherers or farmers. They were observers, thinkers, and creators. Every painting, sculpture, or ritual is a bridge between the material and symbolic worlds, a window into the souls of those who shaped humanity. By exploring these early art forms, we gain a better understanding of the complexity and depth of human life at that time. We discover individuals capable of sensitivity, imagination, and spirituality, who laid the foundations for the culture and artistic expression we know today. Habitats and environment. 10,000 years ago. At that time, humans lived in a world very different from ours, shaped by the post-glacial climate changes and a nature that was still largely wild. Their habitats reflected a fine adaptation to local conditions, available resources, and survival needs. Where did humans live? Early humans were primarily nomads, moving according to the seasons and the availability of food resources. They lived in different types of habitats. The cave served as a natural refuge, offering protection from the elements and predators. These spaces were often equipped with hearths and food storage areas. The caves also show traces of paintings, indicating that these places had a cultural and symbolic dimension. Temporary huts and shelters, made of wood, animal skins, or branches. They were built near watering holes and hunting areas. These lightweight structures were easy to dismantle and transport, ideal for a nomadic lifestyle. The first villages gradually appeared, especially in regions where agriculture was beginning to emerge, such as the Middle East. These villages were made up of small dwellings grouped around water points and fertile land, laying the foundations for sedentary community life. Adaptation to climate and seasons. Humans had developed a high capacity to adapt to climatic variations. In cold areas, they wore clothing made of skins and furs, used fireplaces for heat, and made well-insulated shelters. In warmer regions, structures were more open, allowing for ventilation and protection from the sun. Mobility was also a key strategy. Some tribes followed the animal migrations or changed areas depending on the harvest season and water availability. This flexibility ensured survival even in times of extreme climatic conditions. Relationship with local flora and fauna. Humans had a relationship close and respectful with nature. They knew about animal behavior, edible plants, and the growth cycles of fruits and roots. This knowledge allowed them to choose the best places to temporarily set up camp and to plan hunting and gathering. They avoided overexploiting certain species and managed resources intuitively. For example, they only harvested ripe fruit and let young plants grow or hunted animals specifically to avoid decimating local populations. Natural resource management. Resource management was central to their survival. Humans stored food for times of scarcity, crafted tools from renewable materials like wood and bone, and maintained hunting and gathering areas to ensure a constant supply. Water, essential to life, often dictated the location of encampments. Humans chose areas near rivers, lakes, or natural springs, and avoided areas that were inhospitable or too dangerous. This careful management of natural resources reflected an early ecological knowledge, necessary to survive in an often unpredictable environment. In short, the habitats and environment of humans. 10,000 years ago bear witness to a fine adaptation, strategic mobility, and in-depth knowledge of nature. Caves, huts, and early villages were not only physical shelters, but also spaces where culture, cooperation, and collective survival were built. Humans lived in harmony with their environment, taking advantage of its riches while respecting its limits. A subtle balance that ensured the continuity of life and the transmission of knowledge to future generations. Health and nutrition. Surviving in a changing world. 10,000 years ago, human daily life was closely linked to food. Diet depended largely on the region and the availability of natural resources. Hunter-gatherers consumed a wide variety of fruits, roots, seeds, nuts, and meat from local wildlife. Hunting provided essential protein, while gathering provided fiber, vitamins, and minerals. Seasons dictated the menu. Certain plants were only available at certain times of the year, and meat depended on animal migrations and abundance. With the advent of agriculture, the diet gradually changed. The cultivation of wheat, barley, and other grains became the main source of food, accompanied by domesticated vegetables and legumes. This new diet offered more consistent food security, but it had its limitations. Over-reliance on a few crops could lead to nutritional deficiencies and make populations vulnerable to crop failures. Life expectancy was relatively short, often 30 to 40 years, although some individuals could live longer. Infectious diseases, injuries, and malnutrition posed constant threats. Agricultural communities, living in denser groups, were more exposed to epidemics than dispersed nomadic groups. Infections linked to water and sanitation were common, and medical care was based, relying on natural remedies and empirical knowledge passed down from generation to generation. Despite these challenges, humans demonstrated ingenuity in maintaining their health. Medicinal herbs, poultices, and rudimentary healing practices were used to treat injuries, infections, and some common illnesses. Careful observation of nature also led to the discovery of plants with healing properties. Personal hygiene was simple but essential. Washing in rivers or near springs and avoiding contamination of food storage areas. The shift to agriculture had a mixed impact on health. On the one hand, it provided a more stable diet, allowing larger populations to be supported. On the other hand, dependence on a few crops and a sedentary lifestyle encouraged the emergence of new diseases and increased nutritional deficiencies. The teeth of early farmers often showed increased wear and decay compared to those of hunter-gatherers, indicating a diet higher in carbohydrates. Thus, health and diet 10,000 years ago reflected the delicate balance between innovation and adaptation, between food security and vulnerability. These human experiences laid the foundations for knowledge of nutrition, hygiene, and medicine, which would be refined over the centuries. Understanding these aspects helps us appreciate the challenges our ancestors faced and how their survival strategies shaped the path of humanity. Relations and exchanges 10,000 years ago. At that time, humans did not live in isolation. Even in a predominantly nomadic lifestyle, tribes and communities maintained regular interactions, influencing survival, culture, and the development of knowledge. Interaction between tribes and communities. Human groups often met during periods of collective hunting, seasonal gatherings or near abundant resources, such as water points or harvesting areas. These meetings not only allowed exchange goods and information, but also of strengthen social ties and establish alliances. Social interactions included rituals, festivals, or symbolic ceremonies, often linked to the cycles of nature and animal migrations. First exchanges or trade of objects. Even before the emergence of organized agriculture, humans practiced a primitive trade in objects and resources. Rare materials such as obsidian, high-quality flint, shells, and colored pigments circulated between tribes, often over long distances. These exchanges made it possible to obtain resources that did not exist locally and encouraged the spread of tool-making techniques, hunting methods, and artisanal knowledge. Some objects also had asymbolic or ritual value, which reinforces the idea that the exchanges were not only utilitarian, but also contributed to social cohesion and the construction of a cultural network between communities. Alliances and conflicts. As in any human society, these interactions involved alliances, and the conflicts alliances were used for collective hunting, protection against predators or rival tribes, and sharing seasonal territories. Conflicts, on the other hand, were often linked to the competition for scarce resources or territorial disputes. However, these clashes generally remained limited and controlled. As survival depended on the cooperation and knowledge sharing, conflicts could also give rise to forms of negotiation, exchange or marriage between tribes, thus strengthening long-term ties. Transmission of knowledge and traditions. The transmission of knowledge was a central element of relations between communities. Each meeting constituted an opportunity to learn and share techniques, whether it is the manufacture of tools, hunting and gathering methods, or cultural and ritual practices. The stories, songs, and symbols circulated from one tribe to another, ensuring the continuity of traditions and strengthening collective memory. Young people learned to observe, imitate, and participate, while adults taught survival strategies, social organization, and respect for the environment. In short, relations and exchanges between tribes 10,000 years ago were a vital mechanism of survival and social cohesion. They allowed for the strengthening of cooperation, the dissemination of innovations, and the creation of a network of cultural and economic links, which served both material subsistence and the development of knowledge. These interactions show that even in very ancient times, humanity was already deeply interconnected and capable of complex cooperation. What does the past teach us? 10,000 years ago, humans lived in a world undergoing rapid transformation. Between the end of the Ice Age and the beginnings of agriculture, our ancestors had to adapt to unstable environments, inventing new ways to feed themselves, shelter themselves, and survive. Daily life oscillated between hunting, gathering, and early agricultural experiments, while also incorporating social, cultural, and spiritual aspects that demonstrate a surprising intellectual and emotional depth.